London's Whitmore Museum stood like a marble tomb in the 2 a.m. darkness, its Gothic windows reflecting streetlights like dead eyes. Inside the African Antiquities wing, silence pressed against glass cases filled with stolen centuries. The obsidian statue in case 47 had been perfectly still for 130 years. Until tonight. Blood dripped from its stone eyes at exactly 3:47 a.m. Not metaphorically, real blood, warm and thick, running down carved cheeks like tears of accumulated rage. I watched it pool on the polished floor, my phone flashlight shaking violently, and knew with absolute certainty that I was about to die. The 4-foot figure stood behind shattered bulletproof glass. Someone had broken it from the inside. The museum label read, "Ritual Object, Origin Unknown, Acquired 1893, Ethiopian Highlands." But I knew its real name. My grandmother had screamed it 19 times before her heart exploded 3 days ago. Ayantu is awake. The temperature dropped 30 degrees in seconds. My breath came out frozen. The statue's mouth, carved shut for 130 years, cracked open with the sound of grinding bone. The voice that emerged made my ears bleed. Descendant. The stone finger pointed directly at my face. They stole me. They murdered my priests. They drowned my people's children in holy water. And you work for their museum. Traitor. You will watch them burn, starting tonight. Every window exploded simultaneously. Alarms screamed. And I understood why every Tedesse for 5 generations had died before age 30. My name is McKenna Tedesse. I'm 26 years old. I have 4 years left unless I free a god who might kill me anyway. The Tigray region of Ethiopia, 1893, bloomed with sacred juniper trees and wildflowers that painted the highlands in impossible colors. The Temple of Ayantu stood at the mountain's peak, where lightning struck the same rock every storm, as if the sky itself bowed to what lived there. My great-great-great-grandfather, Desta Tedesse, woke that morning from a nightmare of children screaming underwater. His wife found him trembling, whispering prayers in the old language. The god showed me churches burning and holy water turning red, he said. Something terrible is coming. He ran barefoot up the mountain to the temple. He was already too late. Italian soldiers under Captain Vincenzo Rossi had smashed through the sacred doors at dawn. The temple, built from volcanic stone during an eruption that killed 40 people, their souls bound into the walls as eternal witnesses, echoed with systematic destruction. Rossi stood before the altar, smoking, watching his men stuff golden vessels into bags. The statue of Ayantu towered behind him, 4 feet of obsidian, carved from the crater where that deadly eruption began. The physical embodiment of cosmic balance. Every debt recorded, every injustice weighed, every betrayal marked for correction. Rossi patted the statue's head like a dog. Magnificent craftsmanship for savages. This demon will look perfect in Rome. 8 priests knelt around the altar, chanting desperately. They were performing the emergency severance ritual, disconnecting the god's consciousness from the vessel. They needed 12 more minutes. Rossi kicked the eldest priest in the face. "Stop that noise." Desta burst through the doors, bleeding from the mountain path. "Stop! You don't understand! Ayantu isn't a protector. He's the reckoner! You cannot steal justice itself! Without..." Rossi shot him through the mouth. Desta's body hit the ground, but he didn't die instantly. He lay choking on blood, watching through dimming vision as Rossi ordered his soldiers to lift the statue. The obsidian fought them like it was alive, resisting violation. "Round up the village children," Rossi commanded. "All of them. Time for a demonstration of proper faith." Desta heard those words and understood with horrible clarity what was about to happen. The Italians had done this before, forced conversions through terror, breaking indigenous spirits by destroying what they loved most. Within an hour, 43 children from the village were dragged up the mountain. Their parents followed at gunpoint, forced to watch. The sacred pool beside the temple, fed by natural springs, used for blessing ceremonies for 1,000 years, became an execution site. The children's screams echoed off mountains as soldiers held them underwater one by one. "Baptism," Rossi called it, his voice cheerful. "Washing away your demon worship. You should thank us." 43 children. The soldiers held them under until their small bodies stopped struggling, until the sacred water turned cloudy, until the pool that had blessed births for centuries became a mass grave. Desta was still alive somehow, his shattered body refusing to die until he'd witnessed every atrocity. He watched his 7-year-old daughter Aster dragged to the pool. Her terrified eyes found his as a soldier pushed her head beneath the surface. He watched her tiny hands stop flailing, watched her limp body tossed onto the pile of small corpses. Something inside Desta broke that wasn't physical. His lips moved, forming words in the oldest language, the one that didn't describe reality, but commanded it. Ayantu, witness this. Count every child. Count every tear. When you wake, make them pay in the blood of their blood for 7 generations. Balance the scales with their screaming descendants. The statue's eyes flared with inner light. Desta saw it. The curse was accepted. The debt recorded. The timer started. Desta died whispering, "You stole God. God will collect." Rossi supervised the statue's loading, wiping child baptism water from his uniform. "Excellent work, men. We've brought light to darkness." He looked at the pile of small bodies. "This region will remember today for generations." He was right, just not how he imagined. As the wagon rolled down the mountain carrying the chained statue toward ships, toward Europe, toward museums, something followed invisibly. A presence that moved through soldiers' dreams, counting, always counting. Captain Rossi reached Rome 6 months later. He died 3 weeks after, drowning in his bathtub in exactly 7 inches of water, the same depth as the sacred pool. His lungs filled with liquid that autopsies confirmed wasn't bathwater. It was mountain spring water mixed with something that smelled like burned juniper and child's tears. The first installment on a debt that would take 130 years to fully collect. The statue arrived at London's Whitmore Museum in 1896, purchased by Sir Edmund Whitmore. Edmund died in 1899, drowned in his wine cellar in 4 inches of flooding that shouldn't have been possible on the 3rd floor. But I didn't know any of this until 3 days ago, watching my grandmother Zufan's heart explode in a Johannesburg hospital. She was 72 and perfectly healthy until that morning when she collapsed screaming a name I'd never heard. "Ayantu is awake," she gasped, her eyes wide with terror. "McKenna, the god, our god, the one they stole, he's counting down to 7. Your mother died at 26. Me, I got extra time because I stayed away, pretending our bloodline didn't carry the weight. But pretending doesn't erase debt." I held her hand thinking this was delirium. "Grandma, rest. You're not making sense." Her grip tightened with impossible strength. The Tedesse line was chosen as high priests. We were supposed to protect the god's vessel. We failed. He was stolen. Children were murdered. And we ran. We scattered, changed our names, converted to Christianity, pretended the old ways were stories. We became complicit in forgetting. That is our sin. The monitors screamed. Nurses rushed in. Grandma's eyes locked onto mine with crystalline clarity. "You're 26, same age your mother died. You have maybe 4 years, unless you go to London, Whitmore Museum, African Wing, find him, free him, or die like all of us did." Her heart exploded. Not metaphorically. The doctor said they'd never seen anything like it. A heart that burst from internal pressure that shouldn't have been physiologically possible. I flew to London with nothing but Grandma's journal, leather-bound, filled with names and dates and stories in shaking handwriting. The Tedesse family tree going back 5 generations, every branch ending too soon. Great-great-grandfather Dawit, drowned in a well at 25. Grandfather Tesfaye, drowned in his own vomit at 27. Grandfather Asrat, drowned during a flash flood that killed only him, leaving 12 others standing dry. Every death involved drowning in ways that shouldn't have been possible. Every generation died younger. My mother, Sebel, died when I was 3. Official story, swimming accident. Grandma's journal, Sebel drowned in her bedroom, 10 miles from water, her lungs filled with liquid that smelled like burned juniper. The coroner couldn't explain it. I knew it was the god, still counting. The journal's final entry. I am 72. I outlived the curse by running, by silence, by cowardice. But McKenna is 26 now. The god is no longer patient. He's awake. McKenna, you cannot run like I did. Running just delays. You must face him, free him, or join us in drowning on dry land. I stood outside the Whitmore Museum at midnight. I had a master's degree in art history from Oxford. I'd worked as a junior curator at this exact museum for 2 years, cataloging African artifacts, writing polite descriptions that danced around the word stolen. The irony wasn't lost on me. The descendant of priests hired to organize the very culture ripped from her bloodline. I'd spent 2 years writing exhibit labels like Acquired, 1893, and Origin, Ethiopian Highlands, and Ritual Purpose, Unknown, for objects my ancestors died protecting. I thought I was being progressive. Thought my presence in colonial institutions was reclamation. Thought my careful academic language about problematic acquisitions made me one of the good ones. Grandma's journal was clear. That was collaboration, complicity, betrayal continuing in softer language. I had security access. My curator badge opened every door. I told myself I was just going to look, to verify whether this was real or family trauma. But standing in the African wing at 3:45 a.m., watching blood drip from stone eyes, I understood this wasn't research. This was a summoning. The statue's eyes met mine, and I heard my mother's voice, a memory I shouldn't have. "McKenna, if something happens to Mommy, remember, the god isn't evil. He's just patient, and patience, when it ends, looks like wrath." Descendant. The word shook marble floors, made security alarms scream. You smell like incense, and fear. Good. Fear means you understand. I couldn't move, couldn't speak. The statue, 4 feet of obsidian that should have weighed 1,000 pounds, lifted itself from the display with movements that were liquid and wrong. "They chained me," the god continued, voice coming from everywhere. "Not with iron, with paperwork, with museum catalogs, with polite labels that erase my name. They drowned 43 children in my pool and called it baptism. They shot my priest through the mouth. They stole me and imprisoned me in this marble tomb where strangers pay admission to gawk at their own theft." The statue stepped down. Its feet clicked against floor with sounds like cracking bones. It moved closer. I smelled burned juniper and something older, darker, the smell of balanced equations. "Your family ran," Iantu said. "Desta's children scattered, changed names, converted to the colonizer's god, married into other tribes, forgot the old language, raised children who raised you, a girl with Oxford education who writes museum labels for cages holding my siblings." He was right. I thought of all the artifacts I'd cataloged. The Benin bronzes, the Ethiopian crowns, the Congolese masks. Every one stolen, every one imprisoned, every one given descriptions avoiding words like looted or plundered. "I can explain," I started. The god's hand moved faster than I could track, obsidian fingers wrapping my throat, lifting me. The stone burned like forged metal. "Explain?" His laugh was mountains breaking. "Explain how you took their money? How you smiled at their parties? How you wrote, 'acquired 1893' instead of 'stolen after mass murder 1893'? How you played the educated native who made white guilt comfortable?" The fingers tightened. I couldn't breathe. "You're not here to explain. You're here to choose." He dropped me. I collapsed, gasping, my throat bruising in the shape of stone fingers. The god crouched beside me, his face inches from mine, and I saw something worse than anger. Disappointment. 7 generations I have waited. 7 generations of Rossi's bloodline. 7 generations of Whitmore's bloodline. I counted every breath they took while I was imprisoned. I recorded every laugh, every success. And now, finally, the 7th generation has matured. The debt is due. And you, last of the Tadesse line, will witness divine patience when it ends. Behind him, other display cases shattered. Other statues, other masks, other sacred objects, waking, turning toward us. "What do you want from me?" I whispered. Iantu smiled. "Want? Nothing. I am giving you a gift. Witnessing justice. Starting tonight." He stood, and the other artifacts shattered their cases from inside. A Congolese power figure, an Asante mask, a Dahomey war club, a Zulu shield. Every sacred object stolen from Africa, all waking simultaneously. "The Whitmore family lives in Chelsea," Iantu said conversationally. "Jeffrey Whitmore, great-great-great-grandson of Edmund who bought me. Jeffrey has 3 children, twins Sebastian and Ophelia, age 7, and baby Thomas, age 3. Tonight, Jeffrey will understand what it feels like to watch children drown in water that shouldn't be deep enough. And you will witness." "No," I said, voice barely working. "You can't. They're innocent. They weren't even— and the 43 children drowned in my pool were innocent?" Iantu interrupted, voice sharp as broken glass. "Did 7-year-old Aster Tadesse, your ancestor, deserve to die choking on holy water because her father tried to protect me? Did any of them?" He leaned down. "The colonizers taught you selective morality, that some innocent suffering doesn't count, that some debts expire, that some injustices are too old to matter. I am teaching different mathematics." I wanted to argue, but looking into those obsidian eyes, I understood. This wasn't a curse. This was an equation, and equations don't negotiate. "I can see your thoughts," Iantu said almost gently. "You're thinking revenge is wrong, that justice shouldn't mirror the crime, that I should be better than colonizers. You've been educated into impotence, taught that the oppressed must take the high road while oppressors sleep on stolen wealth." He turned toward shattered windows where London's dawn was graying. "I am not here to be better than them. I am here to be exactly equal. 43 children drowned. 43 descendants will drown. A priest shot through the mouth. A director will die the same. Every theft, every murder, every violation, balanced perfectly. That is not revenge. That is mathematics. The other awakened artifacts moved towards windows, leaving, going into London to find their own debts, their own equations. Wait, I scrambled up. If you do this, all of you, you'll start a war. They'll destroy artifacts they can't secure. Ayantu paused. Good, let them try. We are not artifacts. We are not relics. We are physical anchors of divine forces that existed before their civilizations. Their guns cannot kill us. Their locks cannot hold us. And most importantly, their guilt knows we're right. He stepped through the window. The other artifacts followed, masks floating, shields sliding down walls, figures walking down vertical building faces. I was left alone in the destroyed wing, sirens screaming, and I understood why Grandma ran. Because the old ways, when they wake, don't look like justice to comfortable people. They look like apocalypse. My phone buzzed. Unknown number. McKenna Tadesse, Sergeant Miles Hendrick, Metropolitan Police. Your badge accessed the African wing at 2:47 a.m. We need you at the station immediately. Through broken windows, I saw Ayantu's silhouette moving through pre-dawn streets, other artifacts fanning out like soldiers deploying to targets. The mathematics of revenge, ready to balance 130 years. Miss Tadesse, Subia. Send your people to the Whitmore family home in Chelsea, I said quietly, and tell them to bring body bags. Small ones. I hung up. 3 hours before Ayantu reached Jeffrey's house. 3 hours to decide if I was stopping this, helping this, or just witnessing it. 3 hours to choose between education that taught violence was never the answer, and bloodline that whispered some questions can only be answered in blood. I looked at my curator's hands, soft from paperwork, gentle artifact handling. Grandma's journal was in my
backpack. Pages filled with 5 generations of Tadesse drowning on dry land, running from a death they couldn't escape. Maybe running was the mistake. Maybe I was supposed to stand still and let the equation complete. Maybe being the last Tadesse meant being the final witness before the bloodline ended and debt was paid. Or maybe I was supposed to help. Police sirens got closer. I climbed through the window and down the fire escape, disappearing into morning crowds. Somewhere ahead, a god was walking toward Chelsea, and I was following, not knowing if I was stopping a massacre or ensuring it happened exactly as planned. My name is McKenna Tadesse. I'm 26 years old. I have 4 years left unless the god-killing descendants tonight decides I've earned a different fate. The mathematics had started, and I was the only variable not yet solved. Chelsea woke like any Thursday. Joggers in Battersea Park, parents walking children to expensive schools, wealthy performing comfortable routines in a neighborhood built on empire wealth nobody discussed. The Whitmore family lived on Chain Walk in a 5-story Georgian townhouse overlooking the Thames, worth £12 million, with a history plaque noting Oscar Wilde once visited. Jeffrey Whitmore, 42, woke at 6 a.m. as always. Showered in marble bathroom, dressed in Savile Row suit, went downstairs to make coffee in a kitchen larger than most London apartments. His wife Imogen was preparing organic breakfast. Sebastian and Ophelia, 7-year-old twins, fought over iPads. Baby Thomas sat in his high chair throwing Cheerios with 3-year-old determination. Perfect morning in a perfect house bought with perfect colonial wealth laundered through 6 generations into respectability. Jeffrey kissed Imogen's cheek, ruffled twins' hair, checked his phone. 43 emails including one from museum security. Serious incident in African wing. Multiple artifacts damaged or missing. Emergency board meeting 9 a.m. He frowned. Helena, did something happen at the museum? Before Imogen could answer, the doorbell rang. 6:47 a.m. Too early for deliveries. Jeffrey opened the door. An obsidian statue stood on his doorstep, 4 feet tall, holding scales in one hand and a sword in the other. Beautiful craftsmanship, worth thousands. Some delivery mistake. Can I help you? The statue's eyes opened. They were on fire. Jeffrey Edmund Whitmore, the statue said, its mouth moving impossibly, voice like grinding stone. Great-great-great-grandson of Edmund Whitmore, who purchased me in 1896. You have lived your entire comfortable life on wealth built from theft. The debt is due. Jeffrey stumbled backward, brain refusing to process. Talking statue? Walking statue? A statue that knew his family tree? This was a stroke, mental breakdown, ghastly hallucinations. Daddy, Sebastian appeared behind him, still in pajamas. Who's at the door? Ayantu's burning eyes moved to the child. Something flickered. Not mercy, but recognition. Mathematics reviewing variables. Go back to the kitchen, Sebastian, Jeffrey managed, voice strangled. Right now. But Sebastian, with fearless 7-year-old curiosity, walked forward. Is that a statue? Can I touch it? Ayantu crouched to the boy's eye level. Sebastian Whitmore, age 7. Same age as Aster Tadesse when she drowned in my pool in 1893. Tell me, child, do you know where your wealth comes from? He was a businessman, Sebastian said, automatically, phrase clearly learned from proud family dinners. He brought civilization to Africa. He bought stolen gods, Ayantu corrected gently. He paid soldiers to loot temples and murder priests. He built fortune on cultural genocide. And you are innocent of his crimes, but you are not innocent of their profits. Every meal, every toy, every tuition, bought with blood money laundered through time. Jeffrey grabbed Sebastian, pulled him back. Get away from my son. I don't know what this is, some activist stunt, but you're trespassing. I'm calling police. Call them, Ayantu said, standing. Call the police who served the colonial office. Call the legal system built to protect stolen wealth. Let them try to stop mathematics. Imogen appeared in the hallway. She saw the statue, her banker's mind short-circuiting. Jeffrey, what the hell? Take the children upstairs, Jeffrey ordered. Lock the bedroom doors, now. But before anyone moved, water began seeping under the front door. Thin streams, barely a centimeter deep, creeping across marble entryway with purpose water shouldn't have. It smelled like mountain springs and burned juniper, and something else, child's fear. What is that? Imogen whispered. Sacred pool water, Ayantu said. From my temple, from 1893, from the day 43 children drowned while their parents watched. It's been waiting 130 years to complete its journey. I brought it with me, every drop, carried across oceans and centuries in spaces between thoughts and dreams. And now it finishes drowning the children it was always meant to drown. The water began to rise, not naturally. It defied physics, flowing upward against walls, pooling in midair, forming shapes like small hands, reaching. Daddy, the floor is wet, Ophelia called from the kitchen, voice rising, and it's getting deeper. Jeffrey ran toward the kitchen, expensive shoes splashing through water now ankle-deep and rising impossibly fast. Imogen grabbed Sebastian, pulling him toward stairs, but water followed them, climbing steps like it had intent, like it knew who it was hunting. In the kitchen, Ophelia stood on her chair, Thomas still in his high chair, both watching with confused terror as water poured from nowhere, from ceiling, from walls, from air itself. Clear water that smelled ancient and wrong and purposeful. This isn't real, Jeffrey kept saying, mantra against madness. Water doesn't behave like this. Physics doesn't. Physics? Ayantu's voice came from everywhere, from water itself. You colonized the world and called it physics. You murdered children and called it civilization. You stole gods and called it archaeology. I am teaching you the older physics, the mathematics that existed before your universities gave names to things you don't understand. The water reached Jeffrey's knees, then his waist, rising faster, rising with speed of drowning dreams, rising with weight of 130 years. Imogen screamed from stairs as water lifted Sebastian from her arms despite her desperate grip, as water became hands, dozens of small translucent hands, pulling him into its embrace with terrible gentleness. I arrived at the Whitmore house at exactly 7:23 a.m., having run the entire way, lungs burning, curator badge still hanging like an admission of guilt. Police cars were pulling up, officers pouring out, neighbors gathering in expensive robes, pointing at the Georgian townhouse where water poured from every window like the building was weeping. You can't go in there, miss, an officer grabbed my arm. I work at the museum. I know what's happening. I can stop this. It's a burst pipe, gas explosion, some kind of... The front door exploded outward on a wave, and Jeffrey Whitmore came tumbling out, choking, his Savile Row suit soaked, face masked in terror. Behind him, more water carried Imogen, then Sebastian, then Ophelia, depositing them on wet pavement like offerings. But baby Thomas, where was Thomas? My son, Jeffrey screamed, trying to fight back toward the house. He's still in his high chair. He can't swim. He's only 3. Please, somebody. Ayantu walked out through water like walking through air. In his obsidian arms, he carried Thomas. The baby was soaked, but breathing, coughing up water, but alive. The god set him down gently beside his siblings. The crowd went silent. Every phone was recording, every eye on the 4-foot obsidian statue that moved like a living thing, that had just saved the child everyone thought he was killing. Jeffrey crawled to his children, gathering all 3 in his arms, body shaking with sobs of relief and terror. Why didn't you? Did you think I was here to murder children? Ayantu's voice was quiet, but carried across the stunned crowd. I am not your colonizers. I am not Captain Rossi drowning innocents and calling it baptism. I am justice, not revenge. And justice knows the difference between debt holders and their children. The god turned to face the gathering crowd. Police with useless weapons, neighbors with phones, news helicopters already circling overhead broadcasting live across the world. "Let me tell you what happened in 1893, Iontu said, voice amplified beyond volume, carrying across Chelsea, across London, across every device streaming this moment. Italian soldiers under Captain Vincenzo Rossi invaded my temple. They shot my high priest through the mouth. They stole me from my mountain, and then, to break my people's spirit, they drowned 43 children in my sacred pool while forcing their parents to watch. They called it baptism. They called it bringing civilization to darkness. They called it progress. The water that had poured from the house began pooling in the street, forming shapes. 43 small shapes, translucent children made of liquid and memory, standing in silent witness. Jeffrey Whitmore's great-great-great-grandfather purchased me from those murderers. He knew what had been done to acquire me. He knew about the dead children, the murdered priests, the violated temple. He paid for me anyway. He displayed me in his collection. He profited from genocide and called it cultural appreciation. Jeffrey stared at the god, children clinging to him, perfect mourning shattered. "I didn't know," he whispered. The museum plaques didn't say." "Origin unknown," Iontu quoted. "Acquired 1893. That's what your museum wrote. As if I appeared from nowhere. As if my acquisition was bloodless. As if erasing the story erases the crime." The god moved closer, obsidian face inches from Jeffrey's. "You didn't know because you chose not to know. Because knowing would make your wealth uncomfortable. Because knowing would require you to do something other than maintain your comfortable life built on bones." "What do you want?" Jeffrey asked, voice breaking. "Reparations? Repatriation? I'll advocate for returning all artifacts. I'll resign from the museum board. I'll donate everything my family has to whatever you want. Just please don't hurt my children. They're innocent." "They are," Iontu agreed. "That's why they're breathing. That's why the water carried them out gently instead of holding them under. That's why I'm standing here talking instead of drowning them in 7 inches of sacred pool water like Rossi drowned Astor Tedesse." The god straightened, addressing the crowd again. "I am not here to create more dead children. I am here to make you witness what was done to create your comfort, to force you to see what you've been trained to ignore, to make the invisible visible." The 43 water children began moving through the crowd, translucent, silent, dripping with century-old grief. They walked between expensive cars, designer-dressed neighbors, police with weapons. Everywhere they passed, phones captured their images. Ghostly children made of tears and sacred water and injustice trending across social media in real time. "This is London," Iontu continued, voice carrying authority that made even police lower their guns. "A city built on empire wealth, museums filled with stolen sacred objects. Every institution, every fortune, every comfortable life has roots in theft that's been sanitized into respectability. I am the god who was stolen, but I am not alone. Every artifact behind your museum glass is waking up. Every sacred object torn from its home is remembering its purpose. Every cultural treasure you acquired through genocide is counting the debt." On cue, other artifacts appeared, floating down from rooftops, emerging from the Thames, walking through the crowd. The Congolese power figure, the Asante mask, the Dahomey war club, the Zulu shield, dozens more, all moving toward the museum district, all heading toward institutions built on cultural plundering. "What happens now?" a reporter shouted, camera crew capturing everything. "Are you going to destroy the museums? Kill the curators? What's your demand?" Iontu turned toward the camera, and I saw something in his obsidian features that wasn't anger anymore. It was exhaustion. The wariness of a god who'd spent 130 years imprisoned, counting debts, waiting for patience to end. Finally free, but finding no satisfaction because the damage had already been done. "My demand is simple," he said to the camera, to London, to the world. "Return what was stolen. Not to museums in our home countries run by corrupt governments who'll sell us again. Return us to our temples, to our mountains, to our sacred pools. Return us to the priests' descendants who remember the rituals. Return us to the earth we were carved from. Return us to the purpose we were created for." His voice grew harder. "And if you cannot do that, if your laws and your institutions and your paperwork make it too complicated, then I will return myself, and every other sacred object in this city will do the same, by any means necessary." Jeffrey was still on the ground, children in his arms, watching this with the expression of a man whose entire worldview was collapsing. "I didn't know," he whispered. The museum plaques didn't say." "Origin unknown," Iontu quoted. "Acquired 1893. That's what your museum wrote. as if I appeared from nowhere, as if my acquisition was bloodless, as if erasing the story erases the crime. The god moved closer, obsidian face inches from Jeffrey's. You didn't know because you chose not to know, because knowing would make your wealth uncomfortable, because knowing would require you to do something other than maintain your comfortable life built on bones. What do you want? Jeffrey asked, voice breaking. Reparations? Repatriation? I'll advocate for returning all artifacts. I'll resign from the museum board. I'll donate everything my family has to whatever you want. Just please don't hurt my children. They're innocent. They are, Ayantu agreed. That's why they're breathing. That's why the water carried them out gently instead of holding them under. That's why I'm standing here talking instead of drowning them in 7 inches of sacred pool water like Rossi drowned Aster to Desse. The god straightened, addressing the crowd again. I am not here to create more dead children. I am here to make you witness what was done to create your comfort, to force you to see what you've been trained to ignore, to make the invisible visible. The 43 water children began moving through the crowd, translucent, silent, dripping with century-old grief. They walked between expensive cars, designer-dressed neighbors, police with weapons. Everywhere they passed, phones captured their images. Ghostly children made of tears and sacred water and injustice, trending across social media in real time. This is London, Ayantu continued, voice carrying authority that made even police lower their guns. A city built on empire wealth, museums filled with stolen sacred objects. Every institution, every fortune, every comfortable life has roots in theft that's been sanitized into respectability. I am the god who was stolen, but I am not alone. Every artifact behind your museum glass is waking up. Every sacred object torn from its home is remembering its purpose. Every cultural treasure you acquired through genocide is counting the debt. On cue, other artifacts appeared, floating down from rooftops, emerging from the Thames, walking through the crowd. The Congolese power figure, the Asante mask, the Dahomey war club, the Zulu shield, dozens more, all moving toward the museum district, all heading toward institutions built on cultural plundering. What happens now? A reporter shouted, camera crew capturing everything. Are you going to destroy the museums? Kill the curators? What's your demand? Ayantu turned toward the camera, and I saw something in his obsidian features that wasn't anger anymore. It was exhaustion. The wariness of a god who'd spent 130 years imprisoned, counting debts, waiting for patience to end, finally free, but finding no satisfaction because the damage had already been done. My demand is simple, he said to the camera, to London, to the world. Return what was stolen. Not to museums in our home countries run by corrupt governments who will sell us again. Return us to our temples, to our mountains, to our sacred pools. Return us to the priests' descendants who remember the rituals. Return us to the earth we were carved from. Return us to the purpose we were created for. His voice grew harder. And if you cannot do that, if your laws and your institutions and your paperwork make it too complicated, then I will return myself, and every other sacred object in this city will do the same. Jeffrey was still on the ground, children in his arms, watching this with the expression of a man whose entire worldview was collapsing. The museum will fight this. The government will fight this. They'll say you're cultural property, that you belong to humanity, that I belong to my people, Ayantu interrupted, voice sharp as obsidian edges. Not to humanity, not to museums, not to scholars who study me like I'm a specimen. I am Ayantu, the Reckoner, carved from volcanic stone by priests who bound their souls into my creation. I am not property. I am not an artifact. I am a god. And gods do not negotiate with thieves about returning stolen power. He turned away from Jeffrey, from the cameras, from the crowd, and his burning eyes found me standing at the edge of the police barrier. Our gazes locked across the chaotic street, and I felt that connection, the bloodline recognition, the acknowledgement that I was the last Tedesse, the final variable in an equation still calculating. McKenna, Ayantu said, voice shifting from public declaration to something personal. Come here. The police tried to stop me, but the water children formed a path, and I walked through them, feeling their translucent hands brush my arms like cold blessings. I stood before the god, this force that had killed 4 generations of my family through drowning curses, this divine equation that had been counting my breaths since I was born. You followed me, he said. Why? I don't know, I admitted. Maybe because running didn't work for my grandmother. Maybe because I'm tired of being comfortable with theft just because it's been sanitized into scholarship. Maybe because... I stopped, surprised. Maybe because you're right, and that terrifies me more than you killing me would. Ayantu studied me with those burning eyes. You worked for them. You wrote their sanitized labels. You made their theft palatable to guilty liberals who wanted to feel cultured without confronting genocide. Why should I trust you now? You shouldn't, I said simply. I betrayed you by working there. I betrayed my ancestors by pretending comfort was more important than justice. I betrayed myself by thinking my education made me better than the old ways. I met his gaze despite the heat. But I'm here now, and I'm asking, what do you need from me? Because if your plan is to burn down every colonial institution, I can't stop you. Nobody can. But if your plan is to actually return home, to actually restore what was taken, then you need someone who understands their systems, their paperwork, their legal structures. You need someone who can navigate their bureaucracy while you dismantle their comfort. The god was quiet for a long moment. Around us, the crowd held its breath, cameras capturing this conversation between the colonized descendant and the awakened deity, this negotiation between old ways and new reality. You're offering to be my translator, Ayantu finally said, my bridge between their world and mine. I'm offering to finish what my great-great-great-grandfather started, I corrected. He died trying to protect you. I've spent 26 years running from that responsibility. I'm done running. Ayantu reached out his obsidian hand. If you do this, if you help me return to my mountain, if you advocate for repatriation of every stolen sacred object, if you turn against the institutions that employed you, they will destroy you. Your career will end. Your colleagues will call you a terrorist sympathizer. Your education will be worthless. The comfortable life you've built will collapse. And at the end, you'll still have the family curse. You'll still die young, drowning on dry land, because that debt hasn't been addressed. Tedessa family equation. The god's grip tightened. You need to become what your ancestors were, not a curator of our culture, a priest of it. You need to learn the old language, perform the rituals, rebuild the temple on the mountain where Rossi murdered Desta. You need to stop being British African and become African British. Priority matters, McKenna. Which identity comes first determines everything else. I thought about my Oxford degree, my museum credentials, my carefully cultivated professional reputation. I thought about my grandmother dying with a curse on her lips, my mother drowning in a bedroom, 5 generations of Tedesse dying young because they ran instead of facing what they owed. How long do I have? I asked. 4 years until the curse would naturally kill you, Ayantu said. But if you commit to this path, if you truly become my priest, if you restore what was broken, the curse lifts. Not because I forgive your family's failure, but because you'll have succeeded where they failed. The debt will be paid through action instead of blood. He released my hand. The burn marks on my palm were already forming scars in the shape of Gayez letters I couldn't read yet, but somehow understood. Witness, restore, remember. Jeffrey Whitmore was still on the ground with his children, watching this exchange with an expression somewhere between horror and hope. If she helps you return, he called out, voice cracking, will you stop? Will all of this stop? The water, the drowning, He gestured helplessly. Ayantu turned to him. That depends on you, Jeffrey Edmund Whitmore, on your choice. You can fight this, use your family's money and influence to keep sacred objects imprisoned, lobby for laws that define us as cultural property belonging to museums, maintain the comfortable lie that colonial acquisition was legitimate. If you choose that path, the drowning continues. Not your children, but you, and every other museum director, board member, and collector who profits from theft. You'll drown slowly, in water that rises 1 centimeter per year, giving you time to change your mind, giving you time to choose justice over comfort. Jeffrey's face went pale. That's torture. That's patience, Ayantu corrected. That's being given a choice your ancestors never gave my people. Captain Rossi didn't give Aster Tedessa a choice. He held her underwater until she stopped struggling. I'm offering you years to decide, years to advocate for repatriation, years to use your privilege to dismantle the systems your privilege built. The god was quiet for a long moment. Around us, the crowd held its breath, cameras capturing this conversation between the colonized descendant and the awakened deity, this negotiation between old ways and new reality. You're offering to be my translator, Ayantu finally said, my bridge between their world and mine. I'm offering to finish what my great-great-great-grandfather started, I corrected. He died trying to protect you. I've spent 26 years running from that responsibility. I'm done running. Ayantu reached out his obsidian hand. If you do this, if you help me return to my mountain, if you advocate for repatriation of every stolen sacred object, if you turn against the institutions that employed you, they will destroy you. Your career will end. Your colleagues will call you a terrorist sympathizer. Your education will be worthless. The comfortable life you've built will collapse. And at the end, you'll still have the family curse. You'll still die young, drowning on dry land, because that debt hasn't been addressed. Tedessa family equation. The god's grip tightened. You need to become what your ancestors were. Not a curator of our culture, a priest of it. You need to learn the old language, perform the rituals, rebuild the temple on the mountain where Rossi martyred Desta. You need to stop being British African and become African British. Priority matters, McKenna. Which identity comes first determines everything else. I thought about my Oxford degree, my museum credentials, my carefully cultivated professional reputation. I thought about my grandmother dying with a curse on her lips, my mother drowning in a bedroom, 5 generations of Tedesse dying young because they ran instead of facing what they owed. How long do I have? I asked. 4 years until the curse would naturally kill you, Ayantu said. But if you commit to this path, if you truly become my priest, if you restore what was broken, the curse lifts. Not because I forgive your family's failure, but because you'll have succeeded where they failed. The debt will be paid through action instead of blood. He released my hand. The burn marks on my palm were already forming scars in the shape of Gayez letters I couldn't read yet, but somehow understood. Witness, restore, remember. Jeffrey Whitmore was still on the ground with his children, watching this exchange with an expression somewhere between horror and hope. If she helps you return, he called out, voice cracking, will you stop? Will all of this stop? The water, the drowning, He gestured helplessly. Ayantu turned to him. That depends on you, Jeffrey Edmund Whitmore, on your choice. You can fight this. Use your family's money and influence to keep sacred objects imprisoned. Lobby for laws that define us as cultural property belonging to museums. Maintain the comfortable lie that colonial acquisition was legitimate. If you choose that path, the drowning continues. Not your children, but you and every other museum director, board member, and collector who profits from theft. You'll drown slowly in water that rises 1 centimeter per year, giving you time to change your mind, giving you time to choose justice over comfort. Jeffrey's face went pale. That's torture. That's patience, Ayantu corrected. That's being given a choice your ancestors never gave my people. Captain Rossi didn't give Oster Tedesse a choice. He held her underwater until she stopped struggling. I'm offering you years to decide, years to advocate for repatriation, years to use your privilege to dismantle the systems your privilege built, years to prove you're better than your ancestors. The god's voice hardened. But if you waste those years protecting stolen wealth, then yes, you'll drown, slowly, with full awareness of why. That's not torture, that's mathematics. The reporter pushed forward again. This is insane. You can't just threaten people into what? Ayantu interrupted. Into returning stolen property? Into acknowledging genocide? Into dismantling institutions built on cultural plundering? Tell me, what's insane? A god demanding justice for murdered children? Or a society that imprisoned that god for 130 years and called it preservation? The reporter had no answer. Nobody did. The sun was fully up now, London's morning commute backing up as roads closed around the chaos in Chelsea. The police had given up trying to control the situation. How do you arrest a statue? How do you contain water that defies physics? How do you restore order when the foundation of order itself is being questioned? I need to return to the museum, Ayantu announced. Temporarily, to gather the others, to organize our exodus. McKenna, he looked at me, you have 72 hours to secure official permission for repatriation through proper channels. Submit the paperwork, make the case, use your credentials one last time for something that matters. If the institutions agree, we return peacefully. If they refuse, he gestured at the water children, the awakened artifacts, we take ourselves back by force, and anyone who stands in our way drowns in the same water that drowned the children they never learned about. 3 days isn't enough time for bureaucracy, I protested. The museum board moves slowly. International repatriation requires committees, approvals, legal reviews. Then make them move faster, Ayantu said simply. Make them understand that their paperwork is slower than divine patience running out. Make them choose. Process the repatriation or process the destruction. Those are the only options now. He began walking back toward the museum, the other artifacts falling into formation behind him like a sacred procession. The water children followed, their translucent forms leaving wet footprints that spelled out names in languages London hadn't heard in centuries. Jeffrey struggled to his feet, children still clinging to him. What do I tell people? How do I explain what just happened? Tell them the truth, I said, surprised by the steadiness in my own voice. Tell them you live in a house bought with blood money. Tell them the museum collections are filled with stolen sacred objects. Tell them comfort built on genocide is not comfort. It's a debt that's been accumulating interest for generations. Tell them the bill is due. And tell them, I looked at the water still pooling in the expensive Chelsea street. Tell them the gods they thought were dead or primitive or safely behind glass are awake. And they remember everything. 3 days later, I stood in the emergency session of the British Museum's governing board, my Oxford credentials getting me 5 minutes to make my case. They sat in their leather chairs, their expensive suits, their comfortable authority, listening to me describe the impossible, that sacred artifacts were waking up, that divine forces were demanding repatriation, that they had 72 hours to decide between justice and catastrophe. They laughed, politely at first, then openly. Miss Tedesse, we understand you've been under stress, perhaps a sabbatical. The obsidian statue of Ayantu crashed through the boardroom window. Your 72 hours are up, the god announced. What's your answer? The chair of the board, Sir Malcolm Thornbury, stood with as much dignity as a man facing a living statue could muster. We cannot simply hand over artifacts worth billions. There are laws, protocols, international agreements. Then you've chosen drowning, Ayantu said calmly. Water began seeping under the door. What happened next made international headlines for months. The British Museum flooded from within. Water that couldn't be pumped out, that climbed walls, that filled display cases from the inside. The Victoria and Albert experienced the same phenomenon. Then the Louvre. Then the Met in New York. Then every major museum holding African artifacts. Not destroying them, just making them impossible to display, impossible to study, impossible to profit from. And in each flooded gallery, sacred objects floated free of their cases, drifted through the water like they were swimming home, and disappeared. Some reappeared in their original locations: temples, mountains, sacred groves. Others showed up in the homes of descendants who'd spent generations pretending the old ways were dead. Ayantu returned to the Drakensberg Mountains, to the ruins of his temple, where my great-great-great-grandfather had died. I went with him. I spent the next 4 years learning the old language, rebuilding the temple stone by stone, performing rituals I didn't fully understand, but that my blood remembered. On my 30th birthday, the age when every recent Tedesse had died, I woke up breathing. No water in my lungs, no drowning curse, just the sound of mountain wind, and the knowledge that I'd paid the family debt not through death, but through action. The museums still argue about what happened. They call it mass hallucinations, elaborate hoaxes, climate change causing inexplicable flooding. They write papers about collective delusion and the psychology of guilt. But Jeffrey Whitmore knows better. He spent his fortune advocating for repatriation before the water reached his chin. He survives, but barely, and every bath he takes requires courage he didn't know he needed. And me? I'm the high priest of Ayantu now, the first in 130 years. I perform the rituals. I teach the old language to young people who thought their heritage was just museum exhibits and tourist attractions. I watch as other stolen gods find their way home, as other sacred objects remember their purpose, as other colonized cultures wake up and demand their power back. The world calls it a crisis. I call it mathematics finally balancing. My name is Makena Tedesse. I'm 31 years old. I should be dead from the family curse, but instead, I'm alive, watching the gods who were stolen shake the world awake, and we're just getting started.